that the honourable gentleman is putting forward. No doubt it'll be one of those things, one of the many things that is going to be paid for using the same tax about half a dozen times. What I can say to the honourable gentleman is that he'll be very pleased, no doubt, today that inflation is down yet again, and the government are well on course for achieving their target of cutting inflation by half, as well as growing the economy.
Savile Roberts.
Nonetheless, food inflation remains above 19%, and it hits the poorest hardest, with Trussell Trust warning that the past year saw a record 185,000 food parcels provided in Wales. Meanwhile, supermarkets continue to make record-breaking profits. Many speak of a greedflation crisis. European governments have negotiated with supermarkets to cap food prices. Why won't his government do this too?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've already mentioned some of the help and support the government have given to the least well-off. I want to just remind the honourable lady that in addition to the pensions and benefits rising in line with inflation, there are payments of £900 to those on benefits, £300 to pensioners, £150 to those in households with disability. And quite frankly, Mr. Speaker, if the honourable lady is seriously worried about food inflation, she should be talking to her colleagues in the Welsh Labour government who are propping up the Welsh Labour government about their ridiculous proposals to ban meal deals, which will make meals even more expensive for people in Wales.
Protecting Wales because Tory Brexit has served Wales badly. The EU Withdrawal Act and the Internal Market Act have grabbed Tenant's powers. Paltry post-Brexit funding is robbing Wales of millions. Enough is enough. The House of Lords recently passed Lord Wigley's devolved powers bill to prevent any change to the Senate's powers without a two-thirds vote majority from MSs. Will the Secretary of State support Plaid Cymru's bill and ensure that there is time for debate? Or is he happy to see the people of Wales lose the powers for which they have voted time and again?
Mr. Speaker, far from taking powers away from the Welsh Government, the Conservative government have on a number of occasions actually increased powers to the Welsh Government. By leaving the European Union, we have repatriated powers from Brussels, where we were being governed by an unelectable elite, and brought them back to both Westminster and to Cardiff. And if the honourable lady wants to stop money being wasted, she should have a word with her colleagues in Plaid Cymru who are propping up this Welsh Labour government as they lose hundreds of millions of pounds wasted in the Betsy Cadwaladr Health Service, hundreds of millions of pounds spent on an airport with no planes, and over £100 million spent on plans for a relief road that's never going to get built.
Liz Twist.
Question 2, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
Mr. Speaker, I have regular discussions with Cabinet colleagues on a range of issues. Interest rates are rising across the world as countries manage rising prices due to the pandemic and Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. But I'm very pleased to see that the UK average 2- and 5-year fixed mortgage rates have declined in recent months.
Twist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Chancellor failed to bring in a proper windfall tax at the budget in March. Does the Minister agree that there are still huge holes in that levy that mean billions of pounds that could be used to help Welsh households with the cost of living, and they've been ignored?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Chancellor, this Conservative government, have brought in windfall taxes on energy companies, on oil and gas which is coming out of the North Sea. Energy companies are paying around 3 times more than other companies in taxation, and I hope the honourable lady will be supportive of those companies that want to take more oil and gas out of the North Sea so that we can raise even more in taxation to support the least well-off in the United Kingdom.
Shadow Secretary of State, George Stephens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since his government's mini-budget, 43,000 Welsh households have paid an extra £20.3 million in mortgage payments. So that's a £20 million Tory mortgage premium in just 7 months. His government's economic recklessness continues to cause misery for people across Wales. So will he take the opportunity to apologise to them?
Mr. Speaker, the economic policies being pursued by this government are bringing inflation down, as the news today demonstrates. And I very much hope that the honourable lady will want to celebrate the fact that inflation is now falling, and this United Kingdom government are committing to seeing inflation halved. The policies of the honourable lady's party would push inflation through the roof and push us into another financial catastrophe and crisis of the sort that we saw the last time they left office.
Chris Clarkson.
Question number 3, Mr. Speaker.
Secretary of State.
With your permission, Mr. Speaker, I will answer questions 3 and 4 together. The government have established Great British Nuclear to drive forward the UK's new nuclear programme. GBN will be working with the Government on access to potential sites for new nuclear projects, and I will continue to build on the clear cross-party support there is to promote Wales as the destination of choice for one of the first projects.
Chris Parks.
Diolch yn fawr fawr. My honourable friend, the member for Anismore, has been subtly, almost subliminally making the case for new nuclear in her constituency. But of course, with the advent of SMR, there's the opportunity for the community across Wales to benefit from nuclear clean energy. So can I ask him what questions he's had with ministerial colleagues in Desnes and with the Welsh Government to make sure that Wales is primed to take advantage of this?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have had a meeting with the Minister for Nuclear in Desnes, but I also met yesterday with the interim chair of GBN, Simon Bowen, and we had a very interesting and informative discussion around this emerging technology, which I think is very exciting and offers huge potential for Wales.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank my honourable friend for his answers thus far. Clearly, Wales has a bright future as part of the new nuclear capability across the United Kingdom. What further measures is he going to make, for example, on fusion as well as nuclear energy that's already being provided?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Government have set out support for investigating nuclear fusion, but I fear that there might be others better qualified to give the detail on that. But what I can say to the honourable gentleman is that in all of the meetings I have had with various stakeholders, I have made the case for Wales to be in the forefront of everyone's minds as a place where we could have a new reactor or SMR technology. And of course, I've been encouraged very much by the member for Ynys who's been an absolute champion for nuclear technology and not for nothing is known across Wales as the atomic kitten.
Tony Antoniazzi.
But, Mr. Speaker, his party talk on nuclear, they talk the talk, but, you know, it was the Tories that previously pulled the plug on new nuclear in Wales. He forgets. They've boasted about GB nuclear, but 2 years on, nothing has happened, Mr. Speaker. Nothing at all. Isn't this just more the same broken promises from a tired Tory government that has run out of steam?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it would be tempting, but time would prevent me from drawing attention to the very poor record of the last Labour government when it came to nuclear energy. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, we are driving forward with a new nuclear reactor at Hinkley. We're looking to bring forward an FID on a nuclear reactor in the next term. And, Mr. Speaker, the establishment of Great British Nuclear fully demonstrates our commitment to nuclear technology.
Dave Dugan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the Minister in his conversations about nuclear has discussed the pie-in-the-sky nature of small nuclear reactors, if he's discussed the lack of a cogent plan for nuclear waste, if he's discussed the unenviable unit cost with the Welsh comparison to renewables, and has he indicated to them that he's got a better plan that's not nuclear?
Mr. Speaker, the fact of the matter is that when one considers all of the costs of renewable energy, nuclear comes out very well, not least because it is it is not possible to predict energy. Well, it is not possible, Mr. Speaker, it is not possible to predict when exactly the sun's going to shine or the wind's going to blow, and that is why nuclear has a role to play in our march towards net zero by 2050.
Slane Saxby.
Question 5, please, Mr. Speaker.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The tourism industry in South Wales and South West England is incredibly important, and I understand that councils on both sides of the Bristol Channel are in discussion on how to progress this issue. I'd be happy to meet my honourable friend to discuss it in more detail.
And I thank my honourable friend for his answer, and I wonder, ahead of that meeting, might he be able to secure an analysis of a passenger ferry service and the benefits to those businesses between Ilfracombe and South Wales?
I thank my honourable friend for that question. It's important that we grasp all opportunities to level up our economy through tourism, and that could include a passenger ferry between Ilfracombe and South Wales. Of course, many of the policy levers affecting the visitor economy in Wales are devolved, and it's important that interested parties work closely with the relevant councils on the matter. Mr. Speaker, the UK Government is passionate about tourism, unlike the Welsh Government, who seem more focused on putting in place a tourism tax.
Stephen Kinnett.
Question 6, please, sir.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Steel is vital to the UK, and we are actively engaging with our industry to secure a positive and sustainable future. Industrial sectors, including steel, have been able to bid into government funds worth more than £1 billion to support them to cut emissions and become more energy efficient.
Stephen Kinnett.
Speaker, the governments of the United States and the EU have developed active industrial strategies with multi-billion-pound investments to support their steel industries as they transition to green steel production. And here in the UK, the cavalry is coming in the form of a Labour government and our £3 billion Clean Steel Fund. What a contrast with the party opposite, which is completely and utterly asleep at the wheel on steel. So when will the Secretary of State start standing up for our proud Welsh steel industry, and when will he start getting his colleagues in Cabinet to wake up to the fact that we are losing the race for green steel investment?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, the honourable member will be aware that the Secretary of State for Business and Trade visited Tata Steel in Port Talbot only very recently, and I think that shows her commitment to it. He'll also be aware of the British industry supercharger that was announced only a few months ago, which aims to bring energy costs for energy-intensive industries such as steel production in line with those of other similar countries.
Certainly, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, healthcare services are, of course, devolved to the Welsh Labour government, but it is deeply worrying that only last week the Welsh government revealed that their target for people waiting over 2 years for treatment has once again been missed, with over 31,000 people waiting in pain for over 2 years for their treatment. And in England, with virtually 20 times the population, the equivalent figure is virtually zero.
One of the most important things to improving healthcare systems is the ability to compare data. There's a problem, though, if different legislators use different metrics. So will the UK government agree to an agreement between the devolved nations to share the same data so that comparisons can be made adequately?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think the honourable gentleman makes a very good point indeed. We do need comparable data so that we can see exactly what is going wrong in the health service in Wales. We already know from the data we've got about the 31,000 people who've been waiting more than 2 years in pain for treatment. We know that the Welsh Government have a copy of a report, the EY report into what's gone wrong in Betsy Cadwaladr Trust, a report which they are sitting on and trying to hold secret because it points out that over £100 million was misspent whilst by the Health Board under the control of a Welsh Labour government.
Question number 8, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I have regular discussions with Cabinet colleagues on a range of transport matters. HS2 will benefit people travelling from North Wales to London with the interchange at Crewe, providing shorter journey times for North Wales than is currently possible on the West Coast main line.
Chester Station is the key that can unlock connectivity between England and North Wales. Not only is connectivity vital for thousands of rail users, but also for businesses on both sides of the border and beyond. Will government commit to the rapid electrification of the North Wales train line, which will transform the North Wales and Cheshire regional economy?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I think that's one of the best questions I've heard from anyone on the opposite benches so far this morning. Yes, I think that electrification of the North Wales coastline would be a very good idea, or certainly improvements would be. As the honourable lady will be aware, there are various improvements to the Welsh railway structure being discussed at the moment in ARNEP, and I look forward to ARNEP being published shortly.
Alexander Stafford.
Please, sir.
Mr. Speaker, I have regular discussions with Cabinet colleagues to discuss transport links between Wales and the rest of the United Kingdom. Roads are devolved to the Welsh Labour government, and their opposition to the M4 relief road, and indeed to any kind of road building at all, continues to hold the Welsh economy back, a matter which is of great disappointment to myself and my Cabinet colleagues.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The economy of Wales has always worked on an east-west basis. So, for example, if you're starting a journey from Bangor in the north, it takes 3 times longer to travel to Cardiff in the south than it does to Manchester or to my seat of Rother Valley. Can the Secretary of State offer an explanation then of why the Welsh Government has banned all new road development, or how that might possibly help the Welsh economy?
Hear, hear. Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend raises an excellent point, and the Welsh Government's response to the roads review is absolutely extraordinary. Their opposition to road building is going to hold the Welsh economy back, and I would urge the Welsh Labour Government to reconsider the impact of banning all road building on the long-term prosperity of Wales.
Morgan.
When he delivered his budget in 2020, the Prime Minister, who was then the Chancellor, promised a bypass by Lannymannock and Pan to my constituency on the road that links Oswestry and Welshpool. Can the Secretary of State tell me whether that road will ever come to fruition, or whether that's just another broken promise?
Mr. Speaker, I didn't hear all of that question, but I think it related to the Llanymynech bypass in mid-Wales. The fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, that the Welsh Labour government will continue to receive Barnett consequentials for the road building that takes place in England, and it is a matter for the Welsh Labour government to decide whether or not they wish to spend that money on building new roads, which is something I would like to see them do, or whether they wish to keep throwing it away on white elephants like the airport, which has lost hundreds of millions of pounds over the last few years.
Steve Morgan.
Question number 10, Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will answer questions 10 and 11 together. This government is committed to supporting the decarbonisation of Welsh industry. We have committed £20 billion over the next 2 decades to the deployment of innovative carbon capture technology, and this builds on the existing support for the HyNet cluster in North Wales and North West England, and the £21.5 million to develop the South Wales industrial cluster.
Steve Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The best way to bring down bills in the long term for businesses in Wales and across the UK is to help transition industries away from fossil fuels. That is why Labour is calling for a national wealth fund so that we can help industries like steel win the race for the future. Can the Minister tell the House specifically what steps he's taking to help heavy industry decarbonise?
Well, I thank him for that question. Of course, he's aware of an array of funds that are in place to help decarbonisation. The Carbon Capture, Utilisation and Storage Infrastructure Fund, the Industrial Fuel Switching Fund, the Industrial Decarbonisation Research and Innovation Centre, the Competitive Industrial Energy Transformation Fund, and the Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund, amongst others.
Order. Bill Esterson.
But the UK is the only country in the G7 whose steel industry is currently in decline.
Yeah.
So why won't the government end their sticking plaster approach, match Labour's commitment to a £3 billion green steel fund, and invest in a long-term plan to decarbonise the vital steel sector in Wales?
Yeah.
Well, I would repeat what I said earlier, which is that the Secretary of State has visited the plant in Port Talbot very recently. She's committed to it. We do need to see an electric arc furnace. That is the way forward to protect jobs and to ensure that we have steel production in the UK.
Stephen Crabb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The industrial corridor that runs along South Wales all the way west to my constituency is one of the most important in the UK. It's also one of the most challenging when it comes to decarbonisation. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the government's policies, the Powering Up Britain set of energy interventions, the Celtic Freeport that we secured, point the way to a successful decarbonisation strategy for this critically important part of Wales?
Yeah. Well, my right honourable friend, of course, is absolutely right there. South Wales doesn't have former oil and gas fields in which we can store carbon, but it does have the Celtic Freeport, and non-pipeline transport of captured carbon to fields elsewhere is what will secure decarbonisation for South Wales.
Robbie Moore.
Number 12, Mr. Speaker.
Tuesday.
Mr. Speaker, the coronation saw people in Wales and right across the United Kingdom come together to celebrate the monarchy. It was a wonderful occasion, and it united our public and demonstrated just how strong our union is.
A bit more.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the coronation weekend, I had the pleasure of attending a fantastic coronation church service in Haworth Parish Church, listening to our brilliant Yorkshire harpist Fiona Katie Widdop, as well as joining many other community events. And I know that my right honourable friend attended the similar sorts of events in Wales, which undoubtedly brought the whole of the United Kingdom together. So what does my right honourable friend see as the legacy of the coronation and the fantastic weekend of community spirit?
Mr. Speaker, I thought it was notable that His Royal Highness talked about the importance of service and volunteering being at the heart of the coronation and encouraged us all to take part in some voluntary work. So I was very pleased to join the residents of Llanymynech village in my constituency for an afternoon of litter picking the day after the coronation, which I thought was almost as great an honour as attending the coronation itself was.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I thank the Minister very much for that there. The celebrations for the coronation in Wales were exceptional. The celebrations for the coronation in Northern Ireland were equally successful. Does the Minister agree when it comes to cementing the union, the fact that all 4 regions can be one country,
that Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England together is an indication of why the royalty is so important to all this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Always better together.
Mr. Speaker, to that wonderful question, I can only reply yes.
Alan Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Devolution of Crown Estates in Scotland. Sorry, question 13.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This government is committed to supporting renewable energy generation in Wales, including for the innovative tidal stream technologies at Morlais and through our flagship Contract for Difference scheme, and supporting the huge potential of our floating offshore wind industry through the £160 million in FLOMIS funding for port infrastructure.
Alan Brown. Devolution. The devolution of Crown Estates in Scotland has allowed the Scottish Government to have a more coherent supply chain development for renewable energy. Now, 75% of the Welsh public want to see Crown Estates in Wales devolved so that Wales can benefit from natural resources and renewable energy. Will Westminster listen to the people of Wales, or is it another case Westminster knows best?
Mr. Speaker, devolving the Crown Estates would actually be very risky for Wales, given the fact that at the moment the revenue spent by the UK Treasury is invested across the whole of the United Kingdom. But I can assure the honourable gentleman that this UK government will be absolutely committed to seeing renewable energy spread across the United Kingdom alongside our other priorities of halving debt, halving inflation, cutting debt, ending small votes and reducing NHS waiting lists in the areas where we're responsible for doing so.
Mr. Speaker, Anglesey leads the way in renewable energy, and yet it's being let down by poor connectivity. This week, the Britannia Bridge closed suddenly, and given there's a 7.5-tonne limit on the Menai Suspension Bridge, it's created absolute chaos. Does the Secretary agree with me that Labour in Cardiff should be focused on building a third crossing?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable lady representing Anglesey is absolutely right about this. The Welsh Labour government need to start building roads and start building bridges as well.
We now come to Prime Minister's questions. Sean Hodgson.
Question number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Sean Hodge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Prime Minister agree with his friend, the Tees Valley Mayor, that the National Audit Office must investigate the Tees Works affair? And will he share details of all conversations he has had on the subject with his former Chief Secretary, the member for Middlesbrough South, and the current Levelling Up Minister, given that they've all received donations from Ian Waller, one of the project backers?
Well, Mr. Speaker, honourable friend, the Levelling Up Secretary has already announced an investigation into this matter. But what I would say, it's just the same old. It's the same old bump from Labour. All we get. After years of neglect, it's the Conservatives that are delivering for Teesside.
Mr. Speaker, everyone here has NHS trusts in our constituencies grappling with backlogs. So can I highlight the commitment and hard work of the Gloucestershire Hospitals Trust in bringing down the waiting list over 18 months ahead of the government deadline and fast reducing the over 65 waiting list? Does my right honourable friend agree with me that those who imagine that the opposition has a magic wand up their sleeve to solve these problems need look no further than the woes of the Betsy Cadwallader board in North Wales under Labour political control for a generation?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as my honourable friend says, Gloucestershire in particular has seen a significant reduction in A&E waiting times since December. We recognise, of course, though, there is more to be done, and that's why we're delivering on our plan to recover urgent and emergency care to ensure that people get the care they need easier, faster and closer to home.
Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
How many work visas were issued to foreign nationals last year?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the new statistics, as the honourable gentleman knows, will be out later this week. The most recent statistics we have The most recent statistic we had, as the ONS said at the time, contained a set of unique circumstances, including welcoming many people here for humanitarian reasons.
They're not work visas.
The figures are out. It's 250,000 work visas were issued last year. He knows that answer. He just doesn't want to give it. And the new numbers tomorrow are expected to be even higher. The Prime Minister stood on 3 Tory manifestos. Each one promised to reduce immigration. Each promise broken. They all stood on those manifestos as well. Why does he think his Home Secretary...
Order. I'm going to hear this question. Those who don't want to hear it, we know the answer. Keir Starmer.
They all stood on those manifestos. So why does he think his Home Secretary seems to have such a problem coping with points-based systems?
Mr. Speaker.
And the same respect will be shown, Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, just this week we announced the biggest ever single measure to tackle legal migration, removing the right for international students to bring dependents, toughening the rules on post-study work and reviewing maintenance requirements. But what is the honourable gentleman's contribution? There are absolutely no ideas. There is absolutely no ideas, absolutely no semblance that there would be any control. Why? Because he believes in an open-door migration policy.
Mr. Speaker, if anyone wants to see what uncontrolled immigration looks like, all they've got to do is wake up tomorrow morning, listen to the headlines and see what this government...
Order. Ms Bristow, I think you're going to be leaving. I'm asking you to leave now, because otherwise I'll name you. I'm not having it, and I've warned you before. It's the same people. And the same will happen on this side. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, the reason they're issuing so many visas is labour and skills shortages. And the reasons there are shortages is the low-wage Tory economy. Under his government's rules, businesses in IT, engineering, healthcare, architecture, welding can pay foreign workers 20% less than British workers for years and years on end. Does he think his policy is encouraging businesses to train people here or hire from abroad?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about immigration, but we know his position because it turns out that Labour would actually like to see even more people coming to the UK, increasing the numbers. That's not just my view, Mr. Speaker. Those were the words of his own frontbencher who said having a target isn't sensible and that the numbers might have to go up, Mr. Speaker. So it's clear, whilst we're getting on with clamping down on legal migration, listening to the British public, he's perfectly comfortable wanting to say that he wants free movement back.
Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, they've lost control of the economy, they've lost control of public services, and now they've lost control of immigration. And if he was serious about weaning his government off the immigration lever, he would get serious about wages in Britain and get serious about skills and training. The apprenticeship levy isn't working. It's hard to find a single business that thinks that it is. And the proof is that almost half the levy isn't even being spent. That's fewer young people getting the opportunities they need to fulfil their potential. Businesses are crying out for more flexibility in the levy so they can train up their staff. Labour would give them that. Why won't he?
Mr. Speaker, it's right that we're talking about education and skills. What he failed to mention is just in the past week, what did we discover? Thanks to the reforms of the Conservative government, our young people are now the best readers in the Western world, Mr. Speaker. Reforms that were opposed by the party opposite. He also talked about our record on the economy. And I am very surprised, Mr. Speaker, because I've stood here week after week when he's been so keen to quote the IMF, Mr. Speaker. He seemed to have missed their press conference yesterday, where they actually raised our growth forecast by one of the highest they've ever done, said that we've acted decisively to make sure that the economy is growing, and credited this government with having a very positive effect on future growth.
is the Prime Minister seriously suggesting that breaking the economy, breaking public services, losing control of immigration is some sort of carefully crafted plan? His policies are holding working people back, and all he offers is more of the same. But fear not, because speeding into the void left by the Prime Minister comes the Home Secretary. Not with a plan for skills, growth or wages, no. Her big idea is for British workers to become fruit pickers. Just in case, I can hardly believe she said this, that they forget how to do things. Does the Prime Minister support this let them pick fruit ambition for Britain? Or does he wish he had the strength to give her a career change of her own?
Mr. Speaker, he talks about public service, he talks about the economy. Again, I think he's just failed to notice what's going on. The IMF, as they've said, it's right here, Mr. Speaker. Our forecasts, which he was very keen to point out just a few months ago, now their forecasts are that we will have stronger growth than Germany, France and Italy, Mr. Speaker. What do they say? They're saying that we are prioritising what's right for the British people, Mr. Speaker. He talked about public services, I said. Best reading results in the Western world. When it comes to the NHS, what did we just discover last week? Ambulance waiting times at the fastest response in 2 years, Mr. Speaker. That's a Conservative government delivering for the British people.
Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary may need a speed awareness course. He needs a reality check. This mess on immigration reveals a Tory party with no ambition for working people and no ambition for Britain. Just the same old failed ideas, low wages and high tax. Labour would fix the apprenticeship levy, fill the skills gap and stop businesses from recruiting from abroad if they don't pay properly. That's because we're the party of working people. What does it say about him and his party that they won't do the same?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think he said it 6 times, but I don't think we actually know how he's going to do any of these things, Mr. Speaker. And look, that's the difference between us, Mr. Speaker, because every week we hear a lot of empty rhetoric from the honourable gentleman opposite, but in the past week we can measure ourselves by actions. What have we done on this side of the House? We've introduced new powers to curb disruptive protests. We're protecting public services against undisruptive strike action, Mr. Speaker, and we have new laws to stop the boats. What has he done? He's voted against every single one of those. And that's the difference between us. While he's working on the politics, we're working for the British people.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have all witnessed how Putin is carrying out his savage war against Ukraine. He commenced it, he is the aggressor, and he cannot be allowed to win. That war is now at a pivotal point. So will the Prime Minister use his friendship with President Zelensky to ensure whatever military equipment they need, they will get, be that missiles, drones or jets?
Well, Mr. Speaker, it was an honour to welcome my friend President Zelensky to the UK last week. I think everyone will be collectively proud of the UK's leading role at the forefront of supporting Ukraine. We were the first country to provide support for Ukrainian troops, first country to provide lethal weapons in Europe, the first to commit main battle tanks, and most recently the first to provide long-range weapons. He will have seen the powerful scenes coming out of the G7 summit in Hiroshima last week, and I have always been clear that we will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes.
Leader of the SNP, Stephen Flynn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we learned today that the price of milk, cheese and eggs are up 29%. The price of pasta is up 27%. The price of a loaf of bread, 18%. Does the Prime Minister agree that this is no longer just a cost of living crisis? This is a cost of greed crisis.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it was welcome that inflation has fallen today, but as the Chancellor said, we should not be complacent because there is more work to do. The Honourable Gentleman's right to highlight the impact of food inflation, which is too high, common here in levels that we've seen in other European countries like Sweden and Germany. We are providing significant support to help people with the cost of living, and the Chancellor has met with companies in the supermarket and food supply chain to make sure that they are doing everything they can to bring prices down.
Stephen Flynn.
Mr. Speaker, let's get real, because the food inflation remains at a near 45-year high. Now, yesterday the Treasury indicated that the Chancellor stands ready to act, but his actions seem to be predicated on the outcome of a review by the Consumer and Market Authority. So can the Prime Minister perhaps enlighten us? When does he expect that review to conclude? Because working families can't afford to wait much longer.
Well, Mr. Speaker, honourable gentlemen will know that the CMA is independent of government, but the Chancellor did meet with them recently to discuss the situation in the grocery industry, and it will be for the CMA to make decisions on that. But we're doing everything we can to help consumers manage the challenges of the cost of living, Mr. Speaker. But if the SNP wanted to do their bit, maybe that they could reconsider their deposit return scheme, which has been, it's very clear what people have said. It will it says, as people have said, it will reduce choice and increase prices for consumers.
The Primary Care Access Plan published this month is a very welcome and substantive one, and my constituents want to see rapid delivery of it. So how quickly will the government start providing the £645 million to pharmacists? And how quickly will the SAS doctors come to GP surgeries to make prompt access to primary care a reality for my constituents?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for his contributions to our primary care plan. He and I both know that pharmacies already work to help many people with their health needs, and to help deliver on our priority to cut NHS waiting lists, they will be put front and centre of our primary care recovery with £645 million of additional funding. That will be released later this year as pharmacies start to provide more oral contraception, more blood pressure checks, and crucially, for 7 common ailments like ear infections or throat infections, pharmacists will now be able to provide you with the medicines that you need.
Mr. Speaker, 1/4 of the population of Northern Ireland are on a health waiting list. Our workers are on strike for fair pay, and our public finances are in a mess. Will he give a commitment that the Treasury will immediately begin work on a public sector rescue package so we can transform the health service and ensure that our public sector workers are given a decent wage? And will he join with the people of Northern Ireland, Mr. Speaker, in telling the DUP to get back to work now?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as I've been clear, I firmly believe that Northern Ireland is governed best when governed locally, and I agree wholeheartedly with him that the major challenges he raises can only be properly addressed by the restoration of the institutions. But I also understand the immediate and pressing concerns he raises, and that's why we've prioritised health in the Northern Ireland budget for this year with £20 million of more funding, and I know my honourable friend will be an important contributor to the conversations that the Secretary of State is having to embark on public service reform and restore the executive.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. 2 weeks ago, I raised the issue of AI with the Prime Minister. Only since then, we've seen announcements from firms such as BT that tens of thousands of jobs are likely to be lost to this new technology. But many will be created too. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that we need to map the jobs and the regions that will be most affected by artificial intelligence so that we can target the skills to prepare Britons for the jobs of the future best?
Well, I think my honourable friend makes an excellent point, and like him, I believe that AI does have the potential to transform our economy and society, but of course it has to be introduced safely and securely. We are investing more in AI skills, not only in top-tier talent, but also enabling those from non-STEM backgrounds to access the opportunities of AI. I look forward to getting more recommendations from him for how we can strengthen our investment in skills to make sure everyone can realise the benefits that this may bring.
Anna Mackmore.
Thank you. While the Prime Minister upgrades his local energy grid to heat his 40-foot swimming pool, hands oil and gas companies the likes of BP and Shell £11.4 billion in tax breaks, he scraps the energy price guarantee scheme, plunging record numbers of people into poverty. Is it just a coincidence that these same energy giants funded the Prime Minister's leadership campaign, or is he simply out of touch?
Mr. Speaker, what we are doing is taxing the windfall profits of energy companies and using that money to help pay around half of a typical household's energy bill. That support is worth £1,500. It was extended in the budget by my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, and we all look forward to energy bills coming down, which hopefully will be happening very soon.
Kevin Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. He will recall the commitment he gave to the Building a Brighter Future plan for major investment at Torbay Hospital back in January. Does this commitment remain unchanged?
Well, I congratulate my honourable friend on his continued campaign to improve Torbay Hospital. I'm delighted to reconfirm the government's commitment to major new facilities there as part of our new hospitals programme, and I look forward to further work progressing in the months ahead.
Sarah Olney.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Under the Conservatives, so much of the UK's potential is going untapped. Anaemic growth, falling living standards and declining international competitiveness. Just this morning, a solar power company developing an innovation from Oxford University said that the UK is the least attractive market in which to base its business due to a lack of incentives. This is a homegrown company that could have provided well-paid green jobs lost to this country thanks to the government's lack of an industrial strategy. So why does the Prime Minister think it is that each week more and more promising businesses are choosing to leave the UK?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable lady obviously missed the comments from the IMF yesterday, upgrading our growth performance. She obviously missed the survey of thousands of global CEOs just recently placing the UK as their #1 European investment destination. And it sounds like she also missed my trip to Japan last week, where we announced £18 billion of new investment into the UK economy.
Anthony Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Liberal Democrat-run South Cambridgeshire District Council is the first in the country to put its staff on a 4-day week without any reduction in pay. It's led to a reduction in services and an increase in costs. And yet last week, the Liberal Democrats decided to increase the trial to a year. Why? Because the staff were happier. And now unions are pushing to spread the 4-day working week across the public sector, something that the Taxpayers Alliance estimates will cost £30 billion. Does my right honourable friend agree with the Prime Minister, agree with me, that the public sector are here to serve the public and that the Liberal Democrats aren't working?
Mr. Speaker, public servants should rightly focus on delivering for the public and taxpayers, and it is disappointing to hear from my honourable friend that his local Liberal Democrat council is not doing this, reducing, as I heard, staff contact hours and costing residents more. I urge the council to reconsider their decision because his residents and constituents in South Cambridgeshire District Council clearly deserve better.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In Lewisham, we are gearing up to mark the 75th anniversary of HMT Empire Windrush arriving in the UK. And our Deputy Mayor, Brenda Dacres, is coordinating our local events and is herself a daughter of Windrush generation parents. Now, sadly, at the same time, she is organising advice surgeries for families who have been denied their rights and are still waiting for support from the Windrush compensation scheme 4 years after it opened. So with this landmark anniversary coming next month, will the Prime Minister commit to ensure everyone finally gets the compensation they deserve?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I pay tribute to the honourable lady's constituent for all the work they're doing locally. The Home Office and the government is delivering on the vast majority of the recommendations from Wendy Williams' report into this situation, and we've already paid out or offered, I believe, over £70 million in compensation, and there are hundreds of engagement events happening to ensure that people are aware of what they're able to access, and will continue to do that engagement as we promised.
Brendan Clark-Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Bassett Law has benefited from the multi-billion-pound Step Fusion project, 20 million in levelling up money for Worksop Town Centre, and will now be part of one of the 20 areas selected as part of a new £400 million levelling up partnership. But my constituents in Retford feel neglected by the Labour District Council, which has yet to apply for any funds for the town and is more concerned with trying to play the two towns off against each other. Could the Prime Minister confirm that there is no reason whatsoever why Retford cannot benefit from this latest investment, and would he accept an invitation to visit Bassetlaw to see the great impact government investment is already having in the area?
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his kind invitation to visit, and I shall certainly ask my office to keep it in mind. But as he said, levelling up partnerships are a commitment to work hand in hand with 20 different places across England, most in need of levelling up, and to make sure that they can realise their potential and ambitions. As he says, they're backed by £400 million of investment. We'll make sure that they can be supported to thrive. And I know my right honourable friend, the Levelling Up Secretary, is looking forward to working with colleagues in Bassetlaw to identify the best place to focus their work, which could, of course, include Retford.
Stella Creasy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In 2016, the Prime Minister told people to vote for Brexit because it would stop unelected officials in Brussels having more of a say than his constituents. In 2023, he's asking his MPs to block Amendment 42 to the EU law bill to give unelected officials in Downing Street more say over laws than this chamber. Given the worries and the warnings from his colleagues, why is he going to let the blob have more say over things like holiday entitlements than the people who were elected to do so?
Mr. Speaker, that's just simply not the case. It's the elective government that will be making decisions about what the right regulations are for our country. And it's absolutely right that as a result of Brexit we can now do that, which is why we are repealing and reforming over 2,000 pieces of retained EU law, making sure that our statute book reflects the type of rules and regulations that are right for the British economy and will deliver growth and cut costs for consumers, and that's what our reforms do.
Robin Moore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A key issue which has haunted Keighley for many decades is child sexual exploitation and grooming gangs. I want to see a full Rotherham-style review into child sexual exploitation across my area, but yet Bradford Council's leader and our West Yorkshire Mayor both refused to back one, due to political correctness getting in the way, simply sweeping this issue under the carpet. So will the Prime Minister, for the sake of victims, work with me to ensure that our local leaders do the morally right thing and instigate a full Rotherham-style inquiry across the Bradford district?
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I thank my honourable friend for campaigning on this? As I've said before, we shouldn't let political correctness stand in the way of keeping vulnerable girls safe or indeed holding people to account. As he knows, it's for authorities in the local area to commission local inquiries, and I have no doubt that he will continue to encourage them to do so. For the government's part, we've commissioned the relevant inspectorate to examine current policing practice in response to group-based sexual exploitation of children, and the Home Office will not hesitate to act on its recommendations when they are published this summer.
Andy Chamberlain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I was elected, I worked for a number of years in learning and development in both the police and the private sector, and I'm sure we can all agree that training is absolutely vital to encourage innovation, creativity, but also for compliance. Given that seems to be a particular issue for the Prime Minister's Cabinet at present, will he agree to support my ministerial training standards bill that I'll be presenting later today?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable lady knows, there are processes and procedures in place for ensuring professional standards across government. With regard to training, what I am pleased we're doing is rolling out the lifelong learning entitlement, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that people at any stage in their career can get access to years of government subsidised financing, to ensure that we have a workforce that's fit to the future and everyone can realise the opportunities that are there.
Steve Bryan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Owen Carey died just across the river from here, underneath the London Eye, after suffering a severe allergic reaction while out celebrating his 18th birthday. He'd simply eaten a chicken burger at a restaurant, which, unbeknown to him, and despite his asking, had been marinated in buttermilk. Owen's sister Emma, who is my constituent, was in Parliament last week with her dad and her brother for a debate on food labelling and support for people with allergies. They're fighting for Owen's Law, which is campaigning, among other things, to change the food information regulations surrounding allergy labelling in restaurants. It's attracted huge support. So will the Prime Minister meet with me and Owen's family to see how we can be sure something positive comes out of this tragic loss of a young life?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank my honourable friend for raising Owen's case, and I know the whole House will want to join me in expressing our condolences to Emma and all of his family over what happened. I will absolutely ensure that my honourable friend gets a meeting with the relevant minister to discuss food labelling appropriately so that we can make sure that things like this don't happen.
Ian Paisley.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Will the Prime Minister instruct his officials to publish the list of 1,700 veterinary medicines that will no longer be made available to Northern Ireland vets and the agri-food sector after the grace period has ended? And will explain to the Ulster Farmers Union why that list has not been given to them? And would he agree to meet with me in the Ulster Farmers Union, go through that list and show us how this has removed the border in the Irish Sea?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as the honourable gentleman knows, when we concluded the Windsor framework, what we did was make sure that there was an extension in the grace period for veterinary medicines to give us the time to find a long-run solution to that particular issue. But the honourable gentleman should take heart, because on the issue of human medicines, which I know is important to him and everyone else in Northern Ireland, what we did achieve was complete and full dual regulation of medicines and a dialogue with the EU to resolve the issues in veterinary medicines. And I know that he will want to make sure that we engage closely with him and the UFU, which we have been doing, to find a resolution in the time we have. But I know he will also join me in being very happy that we protected access to human medicines in Northern Ireland, which was a priority for him and his party.
Tom Hunt.
Firstly, I really look forward to welcoming the Prime Minister to Portman Road for Ipswich Town, Southampton next season. And of course, in addition to Ipswich Town, Ipswich Wanderers have also been promoting great news for a town. Yesterday, though, we saw, despite the Public Order Act being passed, we saw images of Metropolitan Police standing around and doing nothing, whilst eco-protesters were wreaking havoc in our capital. Does the Prime Minister agree with us? The moment those activists stand on the road, they should be immediately turfed off the road, like there are in many other countries.
Well, Mr. Speaker, on my honourable friend's first observation, all I can say is ouch, but thank you. But I look forward to the game. But on his second, more substantive matter, this government has passed a serious disruption order, which will ensure that police do have the powers that they need to tackle slow-moving protests. It was a power that the police specifically asked the government for. We've delivered it and put it in legislation. He knows what I know, is that the party opposite tried to block that from happening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Prime Minister, we have 4 million children living in poverty in this country, yet we are the 5th richest economy in the world. So can the Prime Minister say why he would not support universal free school meals for all children to end child poverty?
Mr. Speaker, the numbers are actually as follows. Since 2010, there are 1.7 million fewer people living in poverty as a result of the actions of this government, and that includes hundreds of thousands fewer children living in poverty. And most importantly, because like the Honourable Lady, I do want to ensure that children don't grow up in poverty, but we know that the best way to do that is to ensure that they don't grow up in a workless household. And that's why we have reduced the number of children growing up in a workless household by several thousand, and that is the most powerful thing we can do in the long run to give those children the best possible start in life.
Peter Gibson.
Mr. Speaker, Nancy Spencer from Darlington has raised over £35,000 for St Teresa's Hospice in the last 25 years. Nancy's next adventure was to do a skydive, but having had a pacemaker fitted, her doctor refused to sign it off. However, undeterred, my 80-year-old constituent managed to secure sign-off for a wing walk. Will my right honourable friend join me in wishing Nancy well as she takes to the skies this Saturday?
Well, can I join my honourable friend in thanking Nancy for all her fantastic fundraising work, and of course wish her the best of luck for Saturday. I do wonder if my honourable friend will be joining her, and in particular many of my own constituents use St Teresa's Hospice over the years, so I know what fabulous work it does. But more generally, the hospice sector supports more than 300,000 people with life-limiting conditions in the UK every year, and I pay tribute to all the staff and volunteers working in palliative and end-of-life care for the incredible work they do.
Mr. Speaker, does the Prime Minister agree that it's completely inappropriate for schools to encourage young people under the age of 18 to socially transition, for example by changing their names and their pronouns? All this is going on without parental consent or even knowledge, in breach of parents' human rights. Will the Prime Minister instruct the Department of Education to order schools to stop indoctrinating our children and to concentrate on their duty of care to protect them?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've been very clear that when it comes to matters of sexual education and PHSC, it is absolutely right that schools are sensitive in how they teach those matters and that they should be done in an age-appropriate fashion. The Department for Education is currently reviewing the statutory guidance and curriculum that goes to schools so we can tackle this particular issue, because there have been cases raised with the government and others where this has not been the case. I don't think that's acceptable. We must protect our children, and that's what our new guidance will do.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, the independent members of the Betsy Cadwallader Health Board in North Wales became so concerned about the board's finances that they arranged for Ernst & Young to produce a forensic accountancy report which revealed serious misconduct on the part of several senior board executives, including a conspiracy to falsify accounts. Astonishingly, the response of the Labour Welsh Health Secretary to this scandal was to demand the resignation of those independent board members, while almost all the senior executives in question have been allowed to remain in post, many of them drawing six-figure salaries. Does the Prime Minister agree that this disgraceful state of affairs should be investigated by the police, and does he further agree that it demonstrates why Labour are unfit to run important public services in any part of our country?
Well, Mr. Speaker, as my right honourable friend knows, I am deeply worried about the Betsy Cadwallader Hospital in Labour-run North Wales. It has been, as he said, in special measures for 6 of the last 8 years, and as he remarked, the official audit said there was worrying dysfunctionality. I do hope this issue is investigated properly, and I believe my honourable friend is in contact with the Secretary of State for Wales to take this further.
Mr. Speaker, working people are barred from receiving legal aid if they earn £12,750 a year. So why is the Prime Minister forcing the British public to foot the bill, which I think is currently £250,000 plus, for the Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge and South Rushlips alleged lying inquiry? Why can't he stand up for the British people? Is it because he's too weak?
Mr. Speaker, it's actually a long-established process across multiple administrations that former ministers are supported with legal representation after they have left office to deal with matters that relate to their time in office. That has been the practice for many years, as I said, across multiple political administrations, both Labour and Conservative.
No question, Dean Russell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the government's ongoing engagement to ensure that mental health is treated as equally as physical health. And of course, in my own constituency of Watford, Watford General Hospital, we recently received about £350,000 for improvements to mental health facilities, which will help massively. But given the importance of this issue, would the Prime Minister join me in encouraging fellow colleagues from across the House to attend an event I'll be hosting for the Baton of Hope on the Terrace Pavilion at after PMQs today to raise awareness around mental health and suicide prevention? Thank you.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my honourable friend is a fantastic campaigner on mental health, and I'm pleased to learn about all the work he is doing with the Baton of Hope. I'm pleased that we're also putting more government money into mental health services and taking more action on this issue than any previous government, investing an extra £2.3 billion a year, and I would encourage all colleagues to join him in attending the reception on the Terrace Pavilion.
That completes Prime Minister's questions. Right, we now come to the urgent question. I call Carol Monaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To ask the Secretary of State for the Home Department to make a statement on the changes to the student visa route.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Net migration is too high, and the government is committed to bring it down to sustainable levels. The most recent official statistics estimated that net migration in the year to June 2021 to June 2022 was at 504,000. This is partly due to temporary and exceptional factors like the UK's Ukraine and Hong Kong schemes. Last year, over 200,000 Ukrainians and 150,000 Hong Kong BNOs made use of the routes to life or time in the United Kingdom. These command broad support from the British public. We were right to do so. The government introduced a points-based system in 2020 to regain control of our borders post-Brexit. We now need to decide who comes to the UK and to operate a system that can flex to the changing needs of the labour market, such as the skills needs of the NHS. But immigration is dynamic, and we must adapt to take account of changing behaviours and if there is evidence of abuse. The number of dependents arriving alongside international students has risen more than 8-fold since 2019, from 16,000 in the year to December 2019 to 136,000 in the year ending December 2022. Dependents of students make a more limited contribution to the economy than students or those coming under the skilled worker route. But more fundamentally, our system wasn't designed for such large numbers of people to come here in this manner. Yesterday, we introduced a package of measures to help deliver our goal of reducing net migration. The package includes removing the right for international students to bring dependents unless they're on research postgraduate courses, and removing the ability for international students to switch out of the student route into work routes before their studies have been completed. This is the right and fair thing to do. It ensures that we protect our public services and housing supply against undue pressure, and we deliver on the promises that we've made to the public to reduce net migration. Our education institutions are world-renowned, and for good reason, and the government remains committed to the commitments in the international education strategy, including the goal of 600,000 international students coming to the United Kingdom each year. But universities should be in the education business, not the immigration business. We're taking concerted action to deliver a fair and effective immigration system that benefits our citizens, our businesses, and our economy. We're determined to get this right because it's demonstrably in the national interest.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank you for granting this urgent question. Whilst I thank the Minister for his response, it's disappointing that the Home Secretary is not here herself, or indeed that we have to ask an urgent question rather than a statement being made to the House. International students make an invaluable contribution to our economy. According to the Higher Education Policy Institute, last year they provided nearly £43 billion to the UK economy. In my constituency of Glasgow North West alone, the economic benefit was over £83 million. So first of all, I'd like to ask the Minister, what assessments have been carried out on the economic impact of this change on the university sector and indeed in university towns? International students enrich our society, and they have skills which are proving ever more vital in this post-Brexit climate, which has seen the UK deprived of workers across key sectors. So with current labour shortages in healthcare, STEM, IT, to name but a few, How can the Minister fail to recognise that this policy will simply exacerbate these? The reality is that many students coming to the UK look beyond their studies and want their families to be part of that experience. Without a way for overseas students to bring their families, many will opt to go elsewhere. And any drop in international student numbers will cause further harm to universities that are already facing financial difficulties. This policy makes the Home Secretary's agenda crystal clear. She's launching an attack on migrants regardless of the benefits they bring to the UK. And in pursuing this short-sighted reactionary programme, international students are being caught in the crossfire. In Scotland, international students' contribution to university campuses and to our wider society is celebrated. But Scotland will suffer the consequences of this misjudged policy. Once again, it's indicative of how out of tune this Conservative government is with the Scottish people. So if this government is insistent in pursuing their hostile environment, will they now accept that Scotland's needs and Scotland's wants are different to theirs? Finally, Mr Speaker, will the government now devolve immigration powers to the Scottish Parliament to allow us to choose the way that benefits our communities and our society?
Well, thank you, Ms Speaker. Well, no, we won't devolve immigration policy to the Scottish Government. It's right that the UK benefits from one immigration policy, and that's the way it will always continue under this Conservative government. But I'm afraid the Honourable Lady was misguided on a number of fronts. Firstly, of course, it was this government that created the International Education Strategy. That was a strategy that set a target of attracting 600,000 international students to the UK. We've met that target 10 years early, and we're likely to exceed it this year. The action that we're taking today doesn't take away from that goal. It ensures that there are no unintended consequences. And it was never the intention of that policy to enable a very large number of dependents to come to the UK with those students. It is right that universities attract the best and the brightest, and that those who are on longer courses, such as PhDs or MPhils, can bring dependents with them. But it's not right that education is a backdoor for immigration into the country. The statistics that I quoted earlier show the very significant increases in the number of student dependents. In 2019, there were 16,000 visas issued to student dependents. Last year, that number was 136,000, an 8.5 times increase. In 2019, for every 10 Indian students, there was one visa issued to a dependent. Last year, that doubled to 1 in 5 for Nigerian students studying in this country. In 2022, there were 65,000 dependent visas issued to only 59,000 students. We don't want to do anything that would harm the international reputation of our universities, but it is right that we pay particular concern to pressure on housing supply, to pressure on public services, to integration and community cohesion, and to making good on our commitment to the British public that we will bring down net migration, which is what the vast majority of the public want to see done.
Sir John Redwood.
When we invite people to our country, it's very important that there is good provision of housing and school places and healthcare, and there are huge stresses on the system. Can the Minister give the House some guidance on how much the capital and revenue set-up cost is for a migrant family coming in? I think the EU, when we were in that some time ago, reckoned it was €250,000 for a migrant coming into an advanced country.
Well, it obviously varies very widely between the country of origin, the skills of those individuals, and the points-based system is set up in such a way to encourage higher skilled individuals to come to the UK for work purposes. But he is right to say that it is a relatively accessible system, and that has meant very large numbers of people entering the UK for a range of different reasons in recent years. And we should be acutely concerned about the pressures that that's having on housing supply, on public services and on integration, particularly in those parts of the country with very heated housing markets such as the one that he represents. And that is why it is right that we take action of the kind we are today.
Stephen Kinnock, the Shadow Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. International students are much valued contributors to our world-class higher education system, which is a great asset to our country. But we, and indeed Universities UK, recognise that a tenfold increase in the number of dependents joining students in the UK since 2018 creates significant challenges, and that enforcement measures are long overdue. And therefore, the Leader of the Opposition has already made clear, and indeed our entire front bench, that we do not oppose these changes for master's students. But as usual, the government has failed to deliver an impact on these new rules and has left many of the details very vague. How many people will this affect, both in terms of students and dependents? What will the actual impact be on the numbers? The ONS defines an immigrant as someone who's been here for more than a year or who's coming for more than a year, yet master's students are typically here for less than a year. But what is clear is that dependents of students are only a fraction of the story here. In their 2019 manifesto, the Conservatives acknowledged that the Brexit vote was a bid to take back control of immigration. Yet since then, net migration has skyrocketed from 226,000 to 500,000, which is at a record high, even if you exclude Ukrainians and Hong Kongers. And the number of work visas has increased by 95%, a staggering figure. We're clear why this has happened. It's because for 13 years, the Conservatives have failed to train up Britain's homegrown talent to fill the million vacancies we have, and because there are 6 million people on NHS waiting lists in England alone, most of whom wish to return to the workforce. We want and expect net immigration to reduce, and we have set out plans for how we'll get more of Britain's workers trained up and back to work. And today, the Leader of the Opposition has announced that we will ditch the flawed government policy which allows businesses to undercut British workers by paying migrant workers 20% less in sectors assigned to the shortage occupation list. So will the Minister now commit to scrapping the 20% wage discount on the going rate for shortage occupations? Nothing could be clearer. The Conservatives have lost control of immigration. We, on these benches, are committed to maximising opportunities for Britain's homegrown talent.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that the honourable gentleman has had a Damascene conversion to tighter border controls. Unfortunately, I don't think the British public will believe that. It is the same old Labour Party, the party that has always believed in open borders. Their own leader campaigned for the leadership of the Labour Party, saying that he wanted to defend free movement. Only the other day, the chairwoman of the Labour Party was saying that she expected migration to rise under a future Labour government. Same flip-flopping approach, same open-door policy. We want to ensure that we bring net migration down. We consider that to be a solemn promise to the British public, an important manifesto commitment. This is a significant policy, which I'm glad to hear the honourable gentleman support, which will make a tangible difference to this issue. It will reduce very substantially the number of people coming into the country as dependents. But there may be more that needs to be done. We're determined to tackle this issue and ensure that we bring that migration down.
Greg Clark.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Speaker. The Minister is doing a difficult job very well, and he's set out the context, and it's notable that the front bench shares that analysis. But most students are temporary visitors, and yet they're counted as, many of them, as permanent immigrants. So has my right honourable friend considered changing the definition to include in the count only those who stay?
Well, I respect my right honourable friend and his deep knowledge of this area. I don't think it's helpful to change the way in which the statistics are reported. I do think that it is, you have to consider the fact that anyone coming into this country will place pressure on our housing supply, on public services, in particular if they're bringing dependents, including young children or elderly relatives, into the UK. And in the present climate, in which there's significant pressure on public services, and significant pressure on housing, particularly in certain parts of the country, that is extremely important. We have seen historically that the vast majority of students leave the country and go back to their home country to continue their careers and lives. It's too early to say whether the graduate route will make a material difference to that. It may be that if individuals come to the UK to study, then spend a period of time here on the graduate route, certainly if they bring dependents, that we will start to see a significant increase in the number of people staying here, making a life in the UK and not returning home, in which case policies of this kind will become more important.
SNP spokesperson Alison Douglas.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Any week where universities are celebrating all that international students bring with the We Are International campaign, the Home Office is setting about undermining the UK's place in the highly competitive international education market. And I am dismayed that the Labour Party are supporting their measures today. Canada and Australia and the US must be rubbing their hands in glee, Mr Speaker. Yet more chopping and changing, which makes the UK less attractive. Research published by HEPI last week shows that in 2021-22, the benefit to the UK from international students stood at £41.9 billion, with every single constituency on these islands seeing a benefit. And the dependents that come with them, often those husbands or wives, are working. They're not a burden to the state, and they have to pay the immigration health surcharge as well. So can I ask the Minister, what is the evidence for the policy that he's brought forward today? The written statement yesterday speaks of issues with agents and enhanced enforcement and compliance. So what data does he have to suggest that people are abusing what is already an incredibly expensive system? What equality impact assessment has he carried out? Because Universities UK International have said that restricting dependence will have a disproportionate impact on women and particular countries, incidentally those like Nigeria and India, where the market is growing. And finally, what discussions has he had with the Minister for Higher and Further Education in Scotland ahead of this announcement? And what impact assessment has he carried out on how it will affect institutions in Scotland?
Well, we did think very carefully about this measure and had detailed conversations with colleagues across government, including, of course, with the Department for Education and indeed with universities. In my experience, leaders of universities understand the issue that we're grappling with here. They can see for themselves the very significant increase in the number of dependents who have come to the UK in recent years and why the government would feel the need to take action. The measures that we're putting in place today will ensure that there will still be a route for dependents to come to the UK for research courses, such as PhDs, where people will be here for a sustained period of time, but there won't be for those people here for short courses. And to give the Honourable Lady an example, last year there were 315,000 foreign master's students in the UK. These are very large numbers of individuals, and if those people were to bring dependents at scale, that does put pressure on public services and on housing in the UK. And I'm surprised that the Honourable Lady doesn't appreciate that, particularly given the state of some public services in Scotland.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. It's obviously right that when we see emerging trends in the immigration system that cause concern, that action is taken. I would, though, say if we're discussing things like net migration, we also need to be clear about factors that contribute, like, for example, British citizens returning to the UK and potentially bringing children with them, that also counts towards net migration statistics, but clearly isn't something related to immigration policy. In terms of the wider system, though, the rationale behind this move, I suspect the Minister might have wanted to announce something slightly more comprehensive today, rather than just a focus on student dependence. And would he agree that actually it's also about making sure we'd have the immigration system having the appropriate impact on the labour market and looking more widely at things like, for example, the salary thresholds we have throughout the system, as well as just this change announced today?
Well, I do think the package of measures that we have announced will make a tangible difference to net migration, and taken together with the easing of exceptional factors like those Hong Kong BNO individuals coming to the UK over the next year or two, there is good reason to believe that net migration will fall and that we will be better placed to meet our important manifesto commitment. But he's right to say that it is critical that we do so. if there are further measures, that we consider them, and that we have to think carefully about how migration interacts with the British labour market, because it is quite wrong to perpetuate an economic model that is overly reliant on foreign labour, and where people are coming here, taking jobs from British workers, and we are not tackling the core issue, which is the number of economically inactive people in our country.
Smith.
Speaker, our higher education institutions operate in a global market, which is why universities like Lancaster University attract students from over 100 different countries, many of whom come, study and then return. Now, the Minister has raised the issue of pressure on public services, which makes me wonder who he thinks has been in charge for the past 13 years. But my question to the Minister is, what consultations he had with universities like Lancaster about the implications for them on things like the global and league tables for universities?
Well, we have given careful thought to this announcement, as I said earlier, and worked closely with the Department for Education, who of course are the bridge to universities. It's important to stress that we have met the government's target of 600,000 international students 10 years early, and are likely to exceed that this year. So there's no suggestion that the number of international students is going to diminish rapidly. What we're doing is tackling a particular issue, which is an unintended consequence of earlier liberalisations, which is the very significant increase in the number of dependents following international students. I would also say that it is not healthy for British universities to become overly reliant on international students. Just a few years ago, only 5% of the income of British universities came from international students. Today it's 18% and growing. There's obviously benefits to having income from international students, but we shouldn't be overly reliant upon it.
Sir Desmond Swain.
When these measures have their effect, surely we will then be able to treat foreign students as the booming export that they are, rather than immigration.
Well, foreign students, education of international students is an important export industry. I believe it's the 4th or 5th biggest export industry of the UK, and that's a good thing and something that is supported by the government. That's why we created the international education strategy that has proven to be so successful. But what we're doing today is ensuring that we don't see unintended consequences and unnecessary pressure on public service as a result.
Alistair Carmichael.
So what impact will these changes have on the number of students from overseas coming to study in British universities, and what will be the financial consequences of these changes? Has the Home Office made that assessment?
No.
Well, as I said in answer to an earlier question, we have already met our target of 600,000 students coming to the UK from overseas. That's 10 years early. Last year, in fact, there were 605,000. We expect the numbers to increase this year beyond 600,000. And so there's no suggestion that universities are going to be shortchanged as a result of this. But in the medium term, it will obviously involve fewer dependents coming with those international students. And for the reasons I've already set out, we think that's a good thing. Perhaps he doesn't.
Sir Edward Lee.
This measure is wholly to be welcomed. But the fact is that legal migration is out of control. And the British people didn't vote for Brexit to replace mass migration from Europe with mass migration from the rest of the world. So can I press the Minister on this point made by my honourable friend? We're never going to deal with legal migration until we solve this labour problem, that homegrown employers in Britain are paying too low wages and they're trying to attract people from all over the world. So why don't we raise the threshold to the average earnings? You have to earn average earnings if you want to come here and get a job.
Well, I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for his support. He's right that having left the European Union, taken back control of our borders and migration policy, it's absolutely critical that we make good on our promise to bring net migration down, because it does put intolerable pressure on public services, on housing. It does strain community cohesion, particularly when it happens at a scale and speed which is too great for many people in British society. he makes an important point about the workings of the points-based system and the salary thresholds for the shortage occupation list and for general work visas. And that is something that the government keeps under review, because we don't want to see employers reaching for international labour rather than seeking to recruit and train domestic labour, reducing unemployment, reducing people who are on benefits.
Samsung Desi.
Thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, the Home Secretary makes contradictory statements to different audiences and thinks that nobody has noticed her sleight of hand. She recommitted yesterday to bringing in 600,000 international students per year. But does the Minister now regret that after having completely lost control of immigration figures, she actually expressed her desire to reduce student visas at last year's Conservative Party conference?
Well, the Home Secretary and I are completely at one in our determination to reduce net migration. That is what this party stood on a manifesto to do, and that's what we intend to achieve. The Home Secretary and I want to find ways in which we can tackle abuse and unintended consequences within the system, and the package of measures we've set out this week will do so in a very important, and as his own party appears now to support it, clearly significant and cross-party area.
Sir John Hayes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I refer the House to my entry in the Register of Interest. As the Minister considers work visas, which have exploded and displaced investment in domestic skills and displace the kind of investment in modernity and working practices that are fit for the future, will you also answer this question? Why is it right and fair for those students studying a research degree to be able to bring their people into the country, but not fair for people who are not doing primary research? Surely, if those studying for MAs that don't require research can't bring their family, no one should be able to.
Well, we've said in the announcement this week that we, with the Department for Education, will launch a consultation with the universities sector to design a longer-term alternative to what the system that previously operated, which could be a more nuanced approach. But I think the determination we've made this week is the right one, that those people coming into the UK to study will only be able to bring dependents in if they are doing those high-value, usually longer-term research-based courses such as PhDs, and those coming for short courses will invariably not be able to do so. That will cut out some of the abuse that we've seen in the system today and will focus universities on their primary responsibility, which is teaching and education, rather than, in some cases, being a backdoor to immigration and to work.
Peter Grant.
Mr. Speaker, later this afternoon, my much valued international student Jacqueline will spend the last few hours of her time here before she completes her internship. Jacqueline has been a massive, massive asset to my office, as have the other LSC and other interns I've had the privilege of working with over the last number of years. What should I say to Jacqueline? Should I say thank you, you have been a boon to this place and to these islands? Or should I say to her, you're a problem that has to be controlled?
Well, it would be helpful if the Honourable General didn't spread misinformation to his researcher or indeed to anyone else. It was the government who created, through the International Education Strategy, this commitment that has proven to be so successful, that has led to 600,000 international students coming to the UK, perhaps including the lady he refers to. We also created the graduate route, which has enabled people, potentially including his researcher, to move seamlessly into the workplace here in the UK after their studies, rather than having to immediately apply for a work or family visa, as used to happen in the past. So there's no suggestion that there's any diminution in our support for universities or in international students. But it is right that we get a grip on abuses or unintended consequences. That's what governments have to do when you're trying to control an immigration system. Maybe he doesn't want controlled immigration. We do. That's why we have to take these steps.
Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. International students studying high-quality courses at high-quality universities like Keir in my constituency, which I know the Minister knows well, add a huge amount to our local economy. But isn't it absolutely clear from the figures he quoted earlier about the increase in dependent visas that some universities have, wittingly or otherwise, been selling immigration rather than education? And isn't it vital that we get on top of this?
I completely agree with the honourable gentleman. Universities such as Keir, I know that university well, have played a critical role in the economic development of local communities, and we want to encourage that. But it is important that universities primarily focus on education, not creating courses which are then marketed overseas to individuals whose primary interest is in coming to the UK for immigration and work purposes, and for the courses being a backdoor to that.
Ben Bradshaw.
Isn't the truth, Mr. Speaker, that excellent universities like mine in Exeter have sought since Brexit to replace those thousands of EU students they've lost with students from other parts of the world who tend, for cultural and other reasons, to bring more family members, spouses and children with them? So isn't the government having to clear up another Brexit mess of its own making? And will he be honest with the House and explain how he's going to avoid discriminating against countries like Nigeria and India, where students do tend to bring dependents, and make us even more reliant on students from China?
Well, it's a curious argument that he's making, because, of course, it was as a result of leaving the European Union that we've created an entirely non-discriminatory immigration system that has enabled people to apply to come to the UK, whether for work purposes or indeed as students, from anywhere in the world, rather than making it more difficult for those from outside the EU and having a very large number of EU citizens come here. The proposals we're bringing in place today will tackle this particular unintended consequence of the opening up of international students. I don't see any evidence that it will harm particular nationalities. There are some glaring examples, like the Nigerian one I mentioned previously, but this will apply to everyone. It's an entirely non-discriminatory policy.
Stephen Hammond.
Mr. Speaker, my right honourable friend is completely right that we must choose who comes here and we must strike out abuse. Wimbledon has many English language schools, and English language is a key part of the international education strategy. Given the specific and short-term nature of these students, given they bring in no dependents, and given also that they are not a cost on our public services, would he meet me and the leaders of the sector to discuss restoring work visas for these specific group of students?
Well, I'd be pleased to meet with my honourable friend and to discuss that. And as I said earlier, with respect to the announcement we've made today, we will be doing a consultation with the Department for Education that will give universities the opportunity to set out their case and refine the policy if it's necessary. He does highlight one of the other elements of the announcement that we've made this week, which is clamping down on abuse. There are a small number of unscrupulous education agents who may be supporting disingenuous applications which are selling immigration rather than education. And one of the measures we're taking this week is to clamp down on those with much more targeted and effective enforcement activity.
Joanna Chari.
Speaker, my Edinburgh South West constituents do not share the Tory and Labour obsession with net migration. They understand that Scotland benefits from inward migration, and in fact the University UK research shows that my constituency's net economic benefit from international students is £170.8 million, which gives the lie to most of what the Minister has said. Now, continuing as a member of the United Kingdom is damaging Scotland's universities, including Edinburgh, Napier and Heriot-Watt in my constituency. First Brexit, now this. The Union has to work for both partners, so why won't the Minister sit down with the Home Secretary and consider devolving immigration policies relating to student visas to the Scottish Parliament?
Well, as I've said many times before, we've no intention of devolving immigration policy. And on the broader questions, there's no material difference between Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom in terms of unemployment or economic inactivity, and so there's no compelling case for a bespoke immigration system for Scotland versus the rest of the United Kingdom. And the sheer scale of the number of international students that have come into the UK, all parts, including to Scotland, in recent years, suggests that the policies of this government have increased the number of international students, not diminished them.
Mr. Speaker, pressures in migration policy ultimately lead back to the efficient processing of everyone who UKVI has to deal with. Can my right honourable friend assure me that this change will help UKVI make more decisions more quickly?
Well, I'm pleased to say that UKVI today is a very well-run organisation under the superb leadership of an official in the Home Office called Mark Owen, and that in every one of the visa categories, it is meeting its service standard or significantly exceeding them. And so, I know the lady always likes to deal in anecdote rather than statistics, but I'm afraid to disappoint her, it is.
Leila Moran.
Speaker, I for one am very proud of the international students in my community, Oxford Brookes and of course Oxford University. They pride themselves on being able to attract the best and brightest, and this policy is going to make that harder. Yeah. And we value them because they bring value. They bring, on average, value of £400 million to the Oxfordshire economy. So why is this government, and apparently also the Labour Party, intent on stifling our universities, but also our economy?
For the Honourable Lady, but she is probably the greatest NIMBY in the House of Commons today. She always opposes new homes, new development, new infrastructure in and around Oxford. And so it is quite wrong for her to say that we should have an open-door immigration policy, welcoming more and more people into her community and others, without meeting the demands that come with that in terms of housing and infrastructure.
Tom Hunt.
I am uncomfortable with net migration being at the levels it currently is, and as do I believe most of my constituents. I understand what the government are doing about one-year taught masters. They seem to be about 95% of the dependent. Absolutely makes sense. However, I do have some concerns that some universities might try and game the system and relabel one-year taught masters one-year research masters. I understand why PhDs are treated differently, but when the Minister assured me that this will not happen, we'll clamp down on that. And we do also comment upon the 2-year period, I believe, that students get after they graduate, where they can stay here even if they don't necessarily have a job.
Well, we do believe that the changes we're setting out today will make a marked impact on net migration. We will obviously monitor them very closely for some of the unintended consequences that he refers to, and the consultation that we will do with universities and the broader sector will help us to refine the policy should it be necessary going forwards.
Steve McCabe.
The Minister's already acknowledged that the vast majority of students return home. In fact, the compliance rate for international student visas is 97.5%, the highest for any UK visa category. Doesn't that suggest there may be better targets for the government's energies?
Well, there's no one single intervention that will solve this challenge, but this is what it is, I think, a significant intervention that will make a material difference to net migration. He's right to say that the overwhelming majority of students, historically, international students, historically have left at the end of their studies or shortly thereafter. It is possible that the system that has evolved since 2019 will see different trends because in 2020 only 7,400 non-EU students stayed on post-study. Those numbers will be dramatically higher in the years ahead. And so it may be that the mix of individuals, the countries that they come from, the fact that they're bringing dependents with them in many cases will lead to far higher number of individuals staying on post-study. But I don't think we'll see those trends clearly enough this year. We may see them in the years to come.
Mr. Speaker, many of my constituents continue to be deeply concerned about the levels of net migration, not just over the last few years, but the last few decades, and they, along with myself, will welcome the measures outlined by the Minister today. Is he able to update the House on any measures his department is taking to tackle bogus college placements from students who sometimes come to this country only to disappear into thin air?
Well, alongside the package of measures today, as I said earlier, we are taking further targeted enforcement activity against unscrupulous education agents who are selling immigration entry to the United Kingdom rather than education. We're also going to work closely with universities and the Department for Education to improve communication to universities and their affiliates of immigration rules so that we can clamp down on the kinds of poor practices that he describes.
Speaker, the Minister avoided this question when my honourable friend asked it, so I'll try again. What discussions were there between the UK Government and Scottish ministers on this matter before the announcement was made?
Well, immigration is a reserved matter. But I would just add that I am seeking a meeting with the relevant Cabinet Secretary in the Scottish Government to discuss illegal migration, but her office has so far not offered a meeting.
The statement is right to celebrate the huge growth in international student numbers. I assume that's the bit that the Education Department and the Treasury insisted should go in. But within that, there is a welcome diversification in that growth, away from over-dependence on China. And that was a deliberate part of the international education strategy. Now, the Minister talks about unintended consequences, but it was entirely predictable that those coming from other countries for master's courses would come from a different demographic than Chinese students, that they would have families, and that, like us, they wouldn't want to be separated from them.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, our competitors welcome students with families, so there is a real risk that a blanket ban on dependence will undermine the government's own international education strategy. Now, the statement commits to consulting with universities in developing the approach. So will he confirm that there'll be no blanket ban on dependence of PGT students until that consultation's taken place?
Well, we will implement the policy that we set out yesterday, but concurrently with that, we will launch the consultation with universities, and if we need to refine the policy in the future as a result of that, we will do so. To his first point, I don't think there's any reason why a Chinese student would be less likely to bring dependents with them to the United Kingdom than a Nigerian or a Vietnamese or a Bangladeshi. I don't follow his logic there at all. We want an entirely non-discriminatory approach, and that is what we have said to our international counterparts this week. That's always been our approach to this. We welcome international students from any part of the world.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The vast majority of these students access their courses in the north of England through Manchester Airport in my constituency. Would the Minister agree to an economic impact assessment on how this will impact jobs in my constituency and route development and the cost of that to the wider northern economy?
I was pleased to be at Manchester Airport only on Friday, meeting with my Border Force officials there and seeing the expansion of the airport that's currently underway. I don't foresee any serious loss of revenue for an airport like Manchester. The number of individuals coming into the UK as international students has risen very significantly in recent years. So to the extent that provides income to airports, they will have benefited from our existing policy, and I expect them to benefit in the future.
Marion Fellows.
And thank you for agreeing to this urgent question, even if it only is to expose that you couldn't put a cigarette paper between Labour and Tory policies on this. Scotland has a track record in welcoming international students and into our internationally recognised universities. Scotland wants and needs the benefits they bring. This government's continuous refusal to devolve immigration powers to the Scottish Government shows the contempt that this government has for Scotland. Why doesn't this government understand and recognise that things are different there, and continual refusal to do what Scotland needs and wants is going to come down heavy on them in the next election?
Well, at the risk of repeating myself, there's no material difference between unemployment or economic inactivity in Scotland and the rest of the United Kingdom. So the Honourable Lady is incorrect in that regard, and the UK benefits enormously from having a single immigration policy and offer to international students and universities in all parts of the world.
Stephen Furry.
Thank you. In Northern Ireland, our local universities are very dependent upon international students, particularly so in light of the current budget crisis that we are facing. Also, employers are reflecting they can't access labour without migration, and indeed, which I'm sure is the same for the rest of the UK, our public services actually depend upon migrants for their basic functioning rather than being a burden. So why is the government so insistent in acting against the core interests of our public services, our economy and our local universities?
Could be further from the truth, because of course it's this government that established the international education strategy that's led to 600,000 international students coming to the UK every year, and indeed that number is likely to grow next year. With respect to public services, we created the Health and Social Care Visa, which last year led to 76,000 applications, plus of course their dependents were able to join them, and that was 11% of all of the visas issued to individuals wishing to come to the United Kingdom. So we're doing everything we can to support public services, but we have to address the fact that very high levels of net migration do place intolerable pressure on housing, on public services and on integration.
Anira Wilson.
Mr. Speaker, our schools are in the midst of such a chronic teacher recruitment and retention crisis that the Department for Education currently offers £10,000 relocation payments to overseas applicants to come and train as language and physics teachers in the UK on postgraduate taught courses. If they can't bring their family, they won't want to settle here and use the training that we have provided in our schools where they're desperately needed. Why is the government cutting off its nose despite its own face?
Well, if the Honourable Lady is referring to pressure on school places, that would be a good argument for reducing the number of dependents coming into the United Kingdom, because it's exactly the children of students who in some cases will be making use of primary schools in her constituency.
Jeff Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister still hasn't said what economic impact assessment the government has carried out of this policy. Will he publish one?
Well, I've said already that we take a pragmatic approach to this issue. We are balancing our strong desire to bring down net migration with the needs of the economy. That's why we've taken the approach of standing behind the 600,000 target for international students, but making this important tweak to ensure it isn't abused.
That's it, Red.
Of course, net migration figures also include the number of people who leave this country, and his hard Brexit has made it more difficult for students and others to travel overseas. So that's having an impact on the net migration figures as well. Meanwhile, Glasgow North thrives culturally and socially and economically to the tune of £225.8 million, thanks to our lively and diverse international student community. But what I'd really like to know is, why does the FCDO spend millions of pounds on overseas campaigns that says Britain is great, when the message coming from the Home Office is that Britain is closed?
Well, I do wonder what world the honourable gentleman lives on if he thinks that net migration of 500,000 is low. That's too little, that we should be encouraging more. The levels of net migration to this country are very high today. We want to bring those down, and it's for that reason we're taking measures like this.
Tim Farron.
The University of Cumbria and Lancaster University are hugely successful institutions. We're very proud of them. They're really important to our economy. And indeed, they are very successful exporters. What is their export? High-quality education delivered in the United Kingdom. So why is the government seeking to stifle our great exporters' ability to export? Why have they become suddenly anti-free market? And will they recognise, will the Minister recognise, that by earning money through international students, British universities are able to cross-subsidise services and places for British students? Won't British students be the people who pay the price?
Well, as I said in answer to an earlier question, the economic benefit of international students is clear, and we welcome that, but we don't want British universities to become totally reliant on income from international students. Just a few years ago, that was accounted for 5% of their income. Last year it was 18%, and without measures like this, no doubt it would continue to rise. To his broader point, of course we want to support universities like his own to thrive and to prosper and to market themselves internationally, but the business of universities is education, not immigration.
This presentation. Oh, Jim Chan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his answers to the questions? And I do welcome the announcement as it does show considerable effort in committing to the government pledge to crack down on net migration. However, what assessment has the Minister made on the number of children that will ultimately be left behind whilst their parents come to the UK to study for a better life, but cannot bring their little ones with them on their journey to study and to crucially maintain family life, which I feel is really important?
Well, that's one of the considerations why we have said that those coming here for longer-term research courses, such as PhDs, can continue to bring their dependents with them, because absolutely, if one was coming to the UK for a sustained period of time, it would be right for them to relocate in a more substantial way. But if individuals are making a choice to come here, say, for a one-year master's course, then I think it's perfectly appropriate for the UK to say that that's their decision and they shouldn't bring their dependents with them for that course.
We now come to the statement. Minister Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I draw the House's attention to my declaration of interest. And with permission, Mr. Speaker, in addition to the written ministerial statement I tabled today, I'd like to make a statement regarding today's publication of the government's response to the ROC review of tenant farming in England. This is the next step to support farmers in all corners of the country who are at the heart of our rural economy, following the UK Farm to Fork Summit last week in Downing Street. Now, before I start, I'd like to pay tribute to Baroness Rock, who I know is in the gallery observing our proceedings this afternoon. Her tenacity, her hard work, her dedication, alongside the Tenancy Working Group, has resulted in producing this important review. I'd also like to thank the former member